Greetings. Today, Group G, or the Zero Trust Guard, will be presenting their final presentation for ISN 2104 Capstone Information Security Project. Our members are Himesh Anjula Katri Arachi, Rafael Castro Gonzalez, Roel Jed Adam Palomar, Suraksha Shrestha, Gurneet Singh, and Hardeep Kaur. What is Zero Trust? Zero Trust is a security model that assumes all users, devices, and network traffic are potentially compromised and cannot be trusted by default. It requires continuous authentication and authorization of users, devices, and applications before granting access to resources. It limits access based on the need-to-know principle and least. There are 5 core principles of Zero Trust. First, you should verify explicitly. All users and devices must be authenticated and authorized before accessing any resources. Second, use least privilege access. Access should be granted only to the minimum amount of resources required to complete a task. Third, assume breach. All users and devices are treated as potentially compromised and security controls are implemented accordingly. Next, you should limit lateral movement. Network segmentation and access control are used to limit the spread of a breach. And lastly, you should continuously monitor and analyze. The security controls and user behavior are continuously monitored and analyzed to detect and respond to security incidents. This is a network diagram of our system. We have 2 user devices, one inside the network and one outside the network. Using single packet authorization, the user makes access requests to the controller. The controller checks context or claims and passes live entitlement back to the user. Still using SPA, the client uploads live entitlement in which the gateway uses to discover application matching the user's context. Then, dynamic segment of one network is built for this session. This is the appgate STP controller. Before we go through everything, we need to familiarize ourselves with the configuration and setup of this particular controller. First, there's appliances. Appliances are basically hardware device or virtual machines that provide security and access control for applications. So basically the controller. How it's set up is we assign the network interface to be 192.168.59.22, which is the same as here. Assign our gateway over here at routes. Then servers, and we also activate certain functionalities which are the controller, gateway, and log server. The next term we'd like to set up next would be the sites. The sites is where you house all your resources. We have Phantom Canada, house all the web servers and Active Directory, etc. The basic setup is we just set it to the TLS tunnel protocol and activate entitled base routing. Now that we have those two set up, we then need to add an identity provider for all the users. We name it local for this instance, and right now we didn't assign it with a multi-factor authentication, but you can add it as well as one of the functionalities of appgate. After we have set up the identity providers, we should then add the users by clicking at the very bottom, manage users. Now that we have the user set up, let's pass it into the client. For them to be able to access or communicate with the controller, you need an SPA token. So to set it up, let's get SPA token for this particular controller. Let's go to settings, client connections, then add new, or just use the previously created client profiles. In this case, there are multiple ways of like carrying over to the client machine. One of which like a QR code. You can copy the link or the link to the profile code here as well, or even just copy the template and email it to them. You should email it to the user or send a copy to them to be used later on. Let's first finish up the appgate controller setup. Let's go to operations and then firstly entitlements. Entitlements are access rights or permissions rights to certain resources that we set up here. In this example, DC01 is the same machine as the Active Directory, and another setup is the file server and the web server. So let's see how this is being set up. So very simply, the web server is a WordPress web server. We have set it to status enabled. We assigned it to the site Phantom Canada, and then the action part is what we allow them to access. In this case, it's an HTTP access to our web server. We also need to assign them conditions for which the server can be accessed. So we're going to assign it to be always accessible when the user is authenticated. Conditions are criteria that determine access control to the entitlements, whereas policies specify the actions to be taken based on those criteria. So in this case, we have a few conditions set. Always allow after the user accesses or logs in, they can then always be able to access those resources or entitlements. And here we can also specify very specific conditions such as firewall is enabled and also a multi-factor authenticator condition here. In this case, let's look into the firewall. So the access criteria is right here, which we have to have firewall enabled is true. There's a lot of other criteria so we can set up, such as the day it's being accessed. We can set it to be just the weekdays here, and also the weekends, depending on how you want to set it up for the user. This is an example of a multi-factor authenticator condition. The action here is the user is required first to enter an OTP for you to be able to access. Then let's talk about the policies. So the policies are what you do with those criteria. So in this case, we have assigned the identity provider, local, and the username test, and that user has access to all these different entitlements. Now that we have everything set up, let's try accessing appgate from the user client. This is the client user that is within the network of our resource. The user has already installed the appgate client, and then we first need to upload or import the profile that we copied earlier as SPA key for us to be able to access the controller. So you just click add profile, then copy paste that profile link to add that profile. Then let's try to log in. We have successfully logged in to the appgate client. And then we're going to see that we're connected to the Phantom Canada site. Let's first check what are the entitlements assigned to this user. Click on the triple dots. It will show the About page. Then let's click on Entitlements to see what we have access rights to. So we have access TCP up to this IP address. We can have also ICMP up to this IP address as well, and then access to that Active Directory here, and also access to the web server that we have. Let's try accessing them now. We have successfully accessed the web server here. Let's try turning off or logging out of that appgate client to see if we still have access after logging out of this account. Let's first check out the route tables. Here we can see all the active routes that is given to us by the entitlements. You can see the gateway assigned to us as well. Let's now log out from appgate and see what the route tables look and if we still have access to our web page or even the RDP server. Let's test it out first before we move on. Check if we can establish connection. Yes, we can. Let's log out and see if we still have connection. Let's try accessing the resources. You can see can access those said resources as well. Try connecting to the RDP. Same thing. We're not able to access them. Let's check the route tables. You can see all those active routes that was created by appgate are not there anymore. Let's try accessing it from an outside the network. This is one of the clients that we created for this demonstration. We'll do the same thing, try to access the web app. We can access it as well on this device. And let's try RDP. Same thing, we don't have access. Let's try logging into the appgate client now. Let's try the second user for this time. Should be okay, we connected. Let's try the web server. There you go. As well as the RDP connection here. Oh, let's try if we can establish connection here. Yes, we can. Now we're back at the appgate controller. Let's explore more what the dashboard has. So we can see there's like messages here. Before we had like a controller that does not have a policy. It's gonna be echoed out here. We have the appliance status here, set to warning. So we do have a warning with regards to memory on our controller. You can see the status here as well. See the controller is set to warning here. The gateway is healthy as well as the log server. This part automatically discover apps that we can then click or reconfigure to add into entitlements if there are any apps we have already set up in our machines. And we can also see here the top entitlements that we are using or accessing, which is right now is web server. And these are the users that have access as or we used to access earlier. So let's get to it. So to fine tune different policies, we can click on and get all the claims or information taken from the users. In this example test, you can see all the entitlements assigned to it, conditions set to always here also, and then we can see here the user claims or system claims. These are basically just variables or information that we have taken from the user upon login. So you can see here the firewall was turned on and everything's all the other information here, like the Windows or the OS version or what type of device they are using as well. That way we can fine-tune the policies and conditions for us to allow users to be able to access on different locations or in different conditions as well. So let's try to modify those and see what it looks like whenever a user does not meet some of those criteria. Let's click on conditions here. and then we can see there's firewall is enabled, and we also have a multi-factor authenticator condition. So let's assign one of those entitlements with those conditions, like for example, the web server here, or yeah, this one, let's change it to a different condition wherein firewalls should be enabled. Save. And another would be, let's add a multi-factor authenticator for this one, for the elevated host. And save. So let's try accessing those accounts again and see what happens when you don't fulfill some of those criteria. Okay, let's see what it looks like on appgate. So under access here, let's see which one is it. I think this is the latest one. So we can see here multi-factor was not fulfilled, so we won't be able to ping this IP address based on those conditions that he did not meet. Those are like some examples where he has access to the other resources, but then this specific elevated host access, like in we can, for example, change this to like a SSH connection. He won't be able to connect to that and have all the access to the other resources based on the conditions we have set. Finally, let's see the logs and entries made by the users. You can see some of the inputs here. We can see some policy match where users don't have policies assigned to them and they just access without entitlements assigned to them. But the main analytics part of it is when you access the audit logs here. Right now, we're using Elastic, and we can see the audit logs of all the changes we made on that controller here. And if we go to appliance dashboard, we can get more information on all the accesses we made so far. You can see certificate issued, device onboarded, etc., as well as claims token, enlistment configuration settings, and SSH access over time. Let's go to more dates here just to see more data. Let's go for days, in fact, so we can see all the accesses done so far right here. You can see, and let's get to the user activity dashboard as well. You can see there are failed attempts here, entitlements, and we can see what are the most or the client versions used by users. Then we can modify our policies accordingly based on this information. Thank you. This is Group G again from the Zero Trust Group.